So good morning everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Understanding the Risks and Impact of Climate Change in Relation to Property Purchases. My name is Lucy Quick and I'm the Digital Marketing Manager here at InfoTrack, and I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Andy Crawshaw and Catherine Shears from Groundsure, who will be looking at the different types of risks, how these can affect your property transactions, as well as how to advise your clients when it comes to the topic of climate change. So before we begin the session, I would like to draw your attention to the Q&A tab, which is located at the bottom of your screen. We will be running a Q&A of this session, so please type any questions you might have for Andy and Catherine, along with your name, into the Q&A box. That way, if we do run out of time or your question requires further clarification, then we can extract your information and contact you back directly after the webinar. That's all from me for now. I will now hand you over to Andy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lucy, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. So climate change is obviously an important topic, and in this session, we're going to have a look at how it can impact our environment and ultimately lead to more extreme weather events that could affect property transactions. As you can see, there's the definition of climate change on your screen, but one of the most important things to look at is that it's been primarily driven by human activities, and in particular, burning fossil fuels. This will have an effect in terms of heat trapping greenhouse gas levels in the Earth's atmosphere, and then that raises the Earth's temperature, which is often referred to as global warming. There are a few other signs of climate change, which include things like higher temperatures. We will see more droughts, wilder, wetter weather, then a change in rain and snow patterns. There'll be less snowpack, there'll be melting glaciers, the shrinking of sea ice, and also the thawing of permafrost. So in 2020, the Law Society launched the Future Worlds 2050 project. It aims to have a look at future trends and possibilities across a range of themes to examine what legal work, client needs, and law firm business models might look like within these future worlds. The project will be a mix of quantitative and qualitative research to build a plausible picture of the world in 2050. The top 5 global risks identified in the World Economic Forum's annual Global Risks Report for 2020 are all environmental or climate related, encompassing extreme weather events, failure to adapt to climate change, man-made environmental damage, biodiversity ecosystem loss, and natural disasters. The physical impacts of climate change are a significant risk to business operations, infrastructure, supply chain, and beyond. In an article published in Legal Futures in February, it was reported that helping clients cope with the repercussions of climate change could transform the legal profession, as lawyers focus on proactive risk management advice, knowledge of numerous legal frameworks, and some out-of-the-box thinking. The report said solicitors would play a crucial role in the response to climate change over the next 30 years. It said lawyers will be asked to help their clients identify, avoid, and manage physical, liability, and transition risks linked to climate change. The more commonplace extreme weather events became the less likely they are to be considered unpredictable and thus insurable, leaving losses to be carried by individuals, businesses, and countries themselves. So why does this relate to property transactions? Environmental searches such as ours have been around for years, but recently more and more data on environmental issues is becoming available. When buying a house, most purchasers view the transaction as a long-term commitment and investment. It's vital that everyone in the market understands that changes such as increased bad weather cannot always be seen by looking at what has happened in the past. No longer is the age-old saying of "I've lived here for 50 years and nothing's happened" a viable excuse where risk is involved. So how can climate change affect the amount of rainfall we have, and subsequently, how many more flood events will follow? In England and Wales, there are an estimated 5.9 million properties at risk of flooding. This equates to 1 in 6 homes. 2.7 million properties are at risk of river and coastal flooding. 3.2 million properties are at risk of surface water flooding, and 500,000 properties are at risk of both. The effects of flooding and managing flood risk are costing around £2.5 billion each year to the UK economy. And flood events are increasing. Climate change has increased the risk of floods in England and Wales by at least 20%, and even perhaps as much as 90%. Several indicators in the latest UK State of the Climate report shows that the UK's climate is becoming wetter. For example, the highest rainfall totals over a 5-day period are 4% higher during the most recent decade compared to 1961 to 1990. The amount of rainfall from extremely wet days has increased by 17%. In addition, there is an increase in the longest sequence of consecutive wet days for the UK. The change in rainfall depends on your location. For example, changes are largest for Scotland and not significant for the most southern and eastern parts of England. Climate change has increased the risk of floods in England and Wales, such as those that we saw last February, which was the wettest February on record. River levels and severe flooding in several areas of the country. The wettest autumn recorded was back in 2000. The rainfall recorded had increased by at least 20%. More recently, the winter of 2013-14 and the winter of 2015-16 have been the two wettest on records, with widespread impacts during both seasons. The Met Office study has shown that an extended period of extreme winter rainfall in the UK, similar to that seen in the winter of 2013-14, is now about 7 times more likely due to human-induced climate change. December 2015 was the wettest December, and indeed of any calendar month, and rainfall reached 2 to 4 times the average in the west and north, with severe flooding in Cumbria in particular. A recent study showed that the heavy rains have been made about 60% more likely due to, again, human-induced climate change. UK climate projections shows a trend towards wetter winters and drier summers on average in the UK, with some regional differences. And then in terms of houses built in flood zones, 1 in 10 of all new homes in England since 2013 have been built on land at the highest risk of flooding. Official figures have shown us. And this potentially leaves tens of thousands of people in greater danger from extreme winter storms. The number of properties built in these high-risk areas has more than doubled in recent years, with more than 84,000 new at-risk homes in total since 2013, and this is according to a Guardian analysis of government data. The government has promised to build 300,000 new homes a year by the mid-2020s to help solve the UK's chronic housing shortage. And then there's data from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and this shows that the number of new houses built on land at the highest risk of flooding has risen from 9,500 in 2013 to 20,000 in 2017-18, following a peak of nearly 24,000 the previous year. Now, climate change will almost certainly cause sea levels around the UK to increase by 1 metre or more at some point in the future. And this could happen as early as 2100 within the lifetimes of today's children. As a result, some coastal communities and infrastructure are likely to be viable in their current, form. Sir James Bevan, Chief Executive of the Environment Agency, said, "Climate change means the threat of flooding and rate of coastal change will increase significantly. To prepare for this risk, as a nation, we need to move from a strategy of protection and building higher flood defences to improving the resilience of our communities and our infrastructure, strengthening the ability to cope with flooding and coastal change when it does happen." Climate change has led to concerns about increasing river floods resulting from the greater water holding capacity of a warmer atmosphere. The concerns about flooding are reinforced by evidence of increasing economic losses associated with flooding in many parts of the world, including Europe and the UK. Any changes in river floods would have lasting implications for the design of flood protection measures and also flood risk zoning. Climate change is the biggest challenge we face, and it will definitely have an impact on flooding within the UK in our lifetimes. Earlier in 2021, again, Sir James Bevan added that the climate emergency is already hitting worst case scenarios, and that if left unchecked, will lead to the collapse of ecosystems with massive consequences for humanity. Bevan's warning came 9 months ahead of the COP26 climate change conference in Glasgow, where the UK will host delegates and climate experts from around the world aiming to drive action on adapting to the impacts of the climate crisis, reduce emissions, and protect and restore nature. Bevan said that what had happened in the UK in the past few years should serve as a clear warning about the course the world was on. And now we'll have a look at some recent flood events. So we saw in Bedfordshire during the recent Christmas period, the River Great Ouse, which flows from Northamptonshire through Buckinghamshire, Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Norfolk, flooded massively. Heavy rain on the 23rd and 24th of December caused the river to flood, mainly throughout the Bedfordshire area. More than 1,300 households were urged to evacuate. However, due to improved defences, the Environment Agency said 4,000 other homes were protected along the river. Further investigations have been carried out to examine why hundreds of homes were flooded. It has been proposed that debris and river blockages influenced the flooding in the area, after a local councillor said more could have been done to clear the river. And then also in Wales, we saw the arrival of Storm Bella on Boxing Day. This brought further downpours and winds of up to 70 miles per hour in exposed coastal locations in Wales. Between 15 and 25 millimetres of rain fell in Wales and the southwest England, and 60 millimetres fell in some areas over the hills. The arrival of Bella, followed by relatively calm and cold conditions in the UK, led to the Met Office to issue an amber wind warning for travel disruption in South Wales and across southern England on Saturday, the 26th of December. As of 5 AM on Boxing Day, England had 78 flood warnings and 99 flood alerts, and Wales had 2 flood warnings and 5 flood alerts. And as the country still recovers from Storm Christoph, it is important to consider the damage that storms and flood events do. Flood damage costs the UK around £1.3 billion each year. The total economic damages for England from the winter of 2015 to 2016 floods were estimated to around 1.6 billion, with 32% of total damages occurring to the business sector. Low-income households are amongst the most at risk to flooding and the detrimental financial consequences. They are 8 times more likely to live in tidal floodplains than affluent households, and 61% of low-income renters do not have home contents insurance, leaving them more susceptible to experiencing a financial shock. Flooding has also got an impact on human health, including mental health, something that we've been made more aware of over the last year. But researchers found that people who experience extreme weather events, such as storms or flooding, are 50% more likely to suffer from mental health problems, including depression and anxiety, while a quarter of people who have been flooded still live with these issues at least 2 years after the event. The economic loss and damage from flooding in the UK is also projected to increase. Flood claims have increased by a massive 9,650% between February 2019 and February 2020. Rural properties are particularly vulnerable to storms, from rainwater running off steep hillsides, as well as windstorm damage. And over 6,000 weather-related claims totaling over £50 million occurred after storms Ciara and Dennis hit us with both storm and flood damage in February last year. And this was according to insurer NFU Mutual. And then we'll just have a look at what climate change means for the UK. So climate change means that we can expect to face more frequent or severe weather events like flooding, droughts and storms. These events bring physical risks that impact our society directly and have the potential to affect the economy. If these events happen more frequently, people will become more reliant on insurance to cover the costs of damage to their houses and cars. As weather-related insurance claims rise, insurance companies have more to pay out, increasing everyone's premium. And if companies and households are not insured, they may need to foot the bill themselves. In both cases, the consumer ends up paying more. Weather-related losses, both insured and uninsured, are much higher in recent decades. There was a white paper that's been produced by our flood data supplier, Ambiental, and that has identified that risks are starting to become perceived as being less insurable, and alternative market structures are being evaluated, which provide better incentives for homeowners to install flood resistance measures. For example, door guards, which aim to prevent or reduce water entering the property, and also look at flood resilience measures. So, e.g., things like concrete flooring, which will aim to reduce damage done when a water does actually enter a building. In terms of insurance, a publication by Hudson et al. In 2019 showed that the average risk-based flood insurance premium in Europe could double between now and 2055 in the case that households do not take steps to reduce potential damages from flooding. Currently, both in the UK and continental Europe, flood insurance mechanisms do not incentivise risk reduction by policyholders, and as such, vulnerability to climate-induced flood risk is increasing. In terms of mortgage lending and banking, there is a growing awareness within the sector, as well as increasing regulatory pressure to manage and mitigate climate risk from future flood damage across mortgage portfolios. Given a typical mortgage term of 25 years, and notwithstanding the fact that many borrowers will remortgage within that term, increasing flood risk in the UK means that the value of mortgaged assets could be reduced significantly going forward. Based on property level climate risk modelling carried out by Ambiental, it has been estimated that an additional 1.2 million properties across Great Britain could be at a high risk of flooding by 2050, given that the Office for National Statistics suggests that around 35% of UK households have property debt, and the average value of a mortgage in the UK is circa £137,000. This means that around 60 billion in mortgage debt could be impaired by 2050 due to climate-induced flooding alone. The UK is unique in Europe in that it is the only jurisdiction whereby insurance coverage relates to mortgage or rental conditions. In other words, if you cannot obtain insurance for a property, it is unmortgageable. If your home is in an area deemed as high risk, this could mean needing to have a deposit of at least 30% in order to get a mortgage. Historically, many of the UK's large towns and cities grew up around bodies of water, which facilitated trade and transport. As settlements expand, local authorities struggle to balance housing targets with a dearth of suitable land and the growing threat from climate change. Now local authorities are looking at floodplains as areas of potential development, where previously they had served as natural barriers when rivers burst their banks. The 10 English authorities with the highest number of homes already at serious flood risk plan to build a total of around 35,000 homes in what the government considers high-risk areas. This is defined as having a 1% or greater chance of flooding in any given year. And then they're also looking at building more in lower risk flood zones, according to local planning documents that have been analysed by the Financial Times. In Doncaster, where the town of Fishlake flooded in November 2019, about 6,000 new homes are intended for flood zones. Fenland district in Cambridgeshire, they're planning a new garden town of up to 12,000 new homes in and around a flood zone. And in February 2020, the government watchdog warned that the limited control local authorities has over location of new settlements risks ill-suited developments. In the city of Hull, for example, where the vast majority of land is at risk, the council plans to build nearly 10,000 homes by 2032. Alex Codd, Hull's council's economic development and regeneration manager, said it was completely unrealistic to avoid building in flood zones, provided we're building in an informed and intelligent way, it can be very sustainable. And the government has recently announced a record £5.2 billion investment into the construction of flood and coastal defences, with innovative projects focused on sustainable drainage systems and nature-based flood solutions in the pipeline. Based on current trends, global temperatures are likely to rise between 2 and 4 degrees by 2100, and £1 billion a year would be needed to be spent on flood management to deal with the increased risk. The government said the new £5.2 billion plan will see the delivery of flood and coastal defences to prevent £32 billion in economic damage. The plan also sets out proposed changes to the joint government and insurance industry flood re-scheme. This will allow claims to include an additional amount so that flood resilience measures are included in repairs, and households that have property flood resilience measures in place are allowed to benefit from these lower premiums. Boris Johnson said the long-term plan would be to help push back the floodwaters and protect hundreds of thousands of homes, businesses and livelihoods, adding that the investment would also stimulate economic growth across the UK. So one of the knock-on effects of flooding is how it affects the ground. So following a few slides, we'll have a look at how ground subsidence issues can arise from the effects of climate change. So with hotter and drier summers upon us, there is a suspected increase in clay-related subsidence, and this is due to an exacerbated shrink swell. As a result, some areas of swelling clay soils will be subject to proportionately increased subsidence hazard. South East England, for example, will likely incur the highest hazard exposure to clay-related subsidence, and this is through to 2050. During periods of excessive and prolonged rainfall, groundwater levels can rise, and cohesive soils such as clay have the potential to swell. Similarly, prolonged dry periods, which the UK is seeing more frequently in our summer times due to climate change, can then cause the clay soil to shrink. Over 10,000 homeowners made claims worth £64 million, and the area most affected was South East England, and this is looking back at last year. And South East England is notorious for having many properties built on clay soil, making them especially susceptible to subsidence. It's an issue that affects thousands of home buyers, sellers and businesses, and the stats suggest that up to 20% of residential properties in England and Wales could be running the risk of subsidence at the moment. And then we also look at coastal erosion as well. And across England in the next decade, it is estimated that up to 2,000 homes could face a similar fate due to coastal erosion, which is expected to accelerate with climate change, and thousands of properties have been protected by costly coastal defences. In the UK, there are 600,000 plus properties within 250 metres of the coast. 80,000 properties are at risk of coastal erosion in the long term with no active intervention, and 8,000 properties are at risk of coastal erosion in the long term with a shoreline management plan in place. Coastal erosion is a natural thing. Our coastline, headlands and bays are created by differential erosion, where rocks along the coastline are formed in alternating bands of different rock types. Areas of where there is harder, more resistant rock, such as limestone and chalk, are more at risk from coastal erosion. The geology and the velocity of the North Sea makes Lincolnshire an area at high risk from coastal erosion as well. Global warming causes sea levels to rise as oceans expand and makes storm patterns more energetic. Consequently, it will affect most of the world's coastlines through the inundation and increased erosion. And coastal erosion doesn't just impact properties. It can cause issues to farmland, infrastructure such as roads and railways that we've seen a lot down in the southwest, and it can also affect natural habitats too. So this is Woodhouse Colliery up in Cumbria. And this is a proposed coal mine which is near Whitehaven. The proposal is for the first deep coal mine in England since Ashford be picked in 1987. The mine has been advertised as bringing jobs to a deprived area, but it's also coming for quite a lot of criticism by Green campaigners. Now, the burning of coal is responsible for 46% of carbon dioxide emissions worldwide, and it also accounts for 72% of total greenhouse gases. The Climate Change Committee said in January that this mine would have an appreciable impact on the UK's legally binding carbon budgets and give a negative impression of the UK's climate priorities. They also stated that the new mine is projected to increase UK emissions by 0.4 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year, and this is greater than the level of annual emissions they are projected from all open UK coal mines to 2050. One of the most controversial topics within the UK climate change discussion is this new coal mine. In February 2020, Boris Johnson announced that the deadline for phasing out unabated coal generation would be the 1st of October 2024. However, it was left up to Cumbrian County Council to make the final decision on the approval of this new deep coal mine. The purpose of the mine is to produce coking coal for the steel industry. 80% of the coal from Woodhouse Colliery is set to be exported to Europe's steelworks. The UK and European steelmakers currently import 45 million tonnes of coking coal per annum from the US, from Canada, from Russia, and also from Australia. So it is argued that there will be a balance in CO2 emissions if coal is mined in the UK and exported that shorter distance to Europe than the current process of sourcing coal from further afield, creating high emissions on importation. With more CO2 emissions comes warmer, wetter and extreme weather conditions, increasing the possibility of flooding, subsidence and a host of other issues. So as a conveyancer, what can you do? You can ensure that the searches you buy are as comprehensive as is feasibly possible. For example, flooding data is incredible. It's extremely complex, but so important to understand the future risks associated with the property and also whether insurance is available at a reasonable cost. Energy features such as power stations or oil and gas sites, these could easily lead to an increase in air pollution. Our Avista report covers both full flood and energy infrastructure. In terms of ground movement, has there ever been any recorded at a property or in any sort of close proximity? We offer a shrink swell property assessment in our geo-risk reports, and it also covers other ground instability such as landslides, ground dissolution caused by wetter weather, and also coastal erosion. More intense weather events could lead to an increase in cliff collapses. Whilst the search is predominantly based on model data, it gives a really good indication of future risk. And it goes back to the age-old saying of, I've lived here 50 years and have never experienced any sort of risk. We can really help your clients because with such a risk, while such a risk may not have occurred, the results of climate change mean that these risks become even more real and need to be considered when making what is probably the biggest investment of their life. That is everything from me today. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you find it useful, and I'll pass you back to Lucy.
Thank you very much, Andy. That was really informative. We have had a question that has come through, and if anyone else has any more questions for Andy, then please use the Q&A tab. So the question is, how do you foresee climate change being part of the conveyancing and the home buying process?
I think the biggest issue we're going to have is from lenders. I know from our conversations with some people like HSBC, I joined a webinar about the COP26 a few weeks ago, and they're saying that they're starting to implement climate change and the risks involved in it on all of their lending worldwide. So I think once one of them starts doing it, everybody will follow. We work very closely with Barclays and with RBS. We're also having conversations with them about how they're foreseeing the future risks because of climate change. So I think that the biggest issue is going to come from lenders. And obviously, where lenders say that you've got to do something, then that trickles down and means we all have to look at it if we want to buy a house, basically.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just wait a couple more seconds to see if we've got any more questions that have come through. We will also be sharing this presentation with you all afterwards, so you can refer back to Andy's notes at a later date. I think that is it for questions. I would like to say a big thank you to Andy and Catherine for their time today. Hope you all found this session informative. If you do have any questions about anything that you've seen today or concerns about any other environmental, flooding or mining risks, then please get in touch with your account manager who will be able to assist you. All that's left to say is thank you very much for dialing in today and have a lovely rest of your day.